And I'd like to take just a few minutes to introduce our speaker. So we are really thrilled to welcome Lisa Henderson here as our presenter this evening as a speaker for Wayne County Public Library. Wayne County Public Library received an American Rescue Plan Humanities Grant from North Carolina Humanities. Funding for this grant was provided by the NEH as part of the American Rescue Plan Act Economic Stabilization Plan. We're really thrilled to have you all here with us tonight. Before Lisa begins talking, I'll go ahead and let her get set up. And while she's getting set up, I want to acquaint you with a few of WebEx's attributes that you might not be familiar with. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a little speech bubble that says CC. And if you click on that, you can turn on closed captioning if you need it for the duration of the presentation. And that will be personal to you. And then there's another little speech bubble over in the right-hand corner. And you will see where it says open chat and closed chat. And when you click on that, you'll see a little chat box come up that says enter chat message here. When we get started with the presentation, I am going to mute everybody and hold questions until the end, but you can type whatever you like in the chat. All right, everybody. If you want to practice with the chat right now, I will turn the presentation over to Lisa.
All right. So can everyone see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. So first, I'd like to thank Kelsey Chandler and the Wayne County Public Library for inviting me to speak tonight. I grew up in Wilson, which is, of course, one county over, but my grandmother was born in Wayne County, and my roots are deep in both the Dudley and the Eureka areas. So I'm really to be here. My thanks also to each of you who took the time to join us tonight. Tonight, I introduce you to Napoleon Hagans. No known portraits of Napoleon Hagans exist, but details of his life can be mined from census records, deeds, newspaper articles, and court records, and even his own testimony before the United States Senate Commission. He reminds us that the lives of African Americans in the late 19th century were complex and varied, that we can look within our own communities to find stories that intrigue and inspire and enlighten us, and that history is not complete without these stories. Here's a map, topographical map that was made in 1904. If you're from Wayne County, and I know you are, as old as this map is, you will recognize what you see. So here, this is 222, going from Fremont and then through Eureka and over to Stantonsburg. This is Frank Price Church Road. This, of course, is the railroad track. Here is the road that goes north from Eureka up toward Turner Swamp. This would have been the heart of Napoleon Hagans' world. And today, if you were to leave Fremont headed east toward Eureka on 222, about 2/3 of the way there, you would see Reedtown Road. That would be about here. Reedtown Road was named for a 19th century free family of color who we have a descendant actually in the meeting here tonight. And Reedtown Road will be on your left. If you turn off the highway and drive a short distance on Reedtown Road, you'll reach an intersection with Napoleon Road. At the right time of year, if you gaze north across the fields to a small white dwelling perched on the edge of Acock Swamp, this is the house that Napoleon Hagans built. Napoleon Hagans was born September 22nd, 1840, north of present-day Eureka, Wayne County. His mother, Lavisa Hagans, was a free woman of color who was either or widowed. His father is unknown. On July 20th, 1845, a Wayne County court approved an indenture apprenticing 6-year-old Napoleon to farmer William Thompson. The indenture provided that Napoleon would remain with Thompson until he was 21 years old and would learn farming skills. Involuntary apprenticeship was a double-edged sword. Though irregularly enforced, state law required the indenture of free children of color who were orphaned or who were born to unmarried women. And apprentices turned out to be a source of cheap workers for white farmers during a time in which enslaved labor was increasingly expensive. However, apprenticeship also guaranteed food, shelter, and instruction to children whose mothers had few ways to earn income. Napoleon and his mother seem to have been able to leverage the system to their advantage. Though working for Thompson, Napoleon apparently continued to live with his family during the period of his indenture. So here we have the 1850 census. It's from the 1850 census. In that census, Napoleon appears twice. Once, he's with his stepfather, Aaron Seabury, his mother, Lavisa, his sister, Frances, who was my great-great-grandmother, by the way, and another Seabury relative. A second time, he's listed with his grandmother, Lacey Hagans, in a household with William Thompson, who indentured him. This house was probably on Thompson's land. Thompson, in addition to apprenticing Napoleon, indentured 4 artist siblings, Minerva, Susan, Nancy, and Alfred, and also Calvin Hagans, who was most likely Napoleon's uncle. Napoleon Hagans would have been released from his indenture right around the outbreak of the Civil War. There is no evidence that he joined the United States colored troops. Few freemen of color from Wayne County did. They have been forced, like other freemen, to work on Confederate fortifications in the southeast part of North Carolina. The 5 years after the war, though poorly documented, were pivotal in the trajectory of Napoleon's life. He married, his children were born, and he began to accumulate wealth. The first of his 4 sons was William Coley, who was born in the mid-1860s to Winnie Coley, a formerly enslaved woman. Around 1867, no license has been found, Napoleon married Apsala Appy Ward, born in 1849, Ward, an enslaved woman, and their owner, David G.W. Ward, a wealthy physician who lived just below Stantonsburg in Wilson County and had vast land holdings in Greene County. This is the Ward Plantation House, which still stands just south of Stantonsburg. It's a house that I grew up knowing as the home of some of my cousins' relatives. And we would go, in the summers, they would have family reunions, and all their cousins would come down from New York and New Jersey and Washington, D.C. and everywhere, and we would play out on the grounds. And when I realized 10 years or so ago that I had been in this house, that I remembered this house from my childhood, it was really a mind-blowing moment to connect that house to Apsala Ward Hagans and to Napoleon. Appy Hagans bore 2 sons in quick succession, Henry Edward in 1868 and William Scarlett in 1869. A year later, Appy's sister Mittie Ward gave birth to Napoleon's last son, Joseph Henry Ward. By his 20s, Napoleon was well on his way to the success he would enjoy for the rest of his life. Around 1865, he had enough spare cash to pay off about $450 of his stepfather Aaron Seabury's debts. It's a little over $8,000 in today's money. 15 years later, when he traveled to Washington, D.C. to testify about conditions for African American farmers in Wayne County, he was questioned about how he got Napoleon restrained. I rented a farm and started on 2 government horses. I went to the tightest man I know and got him to help me. I rented from Mr. Exum out there. Mr. Exum was almost certainly William J. Exum, a wealthy white farmer who lived north of Eureka. Napoleon Hagans rented land to a tenant farmer and thereby gained the social and economic benefit of Exum's backing. When the census taker visited the Haganses in 1870, Napoleon reported that he owned no real estate, but a whopping $3,000 in personal property, which would have included household furnishings, farm tools and equipment, livestock, and crops. So this is an excerpt from the 1870 census of Nahunta Township, which is the northeast tier of Wayne County. And here you see Poland Hagans, as he was called. Sometimes he was also called Pole, listed as a farm laborer. In fact, he was what was actually technically a tenant farmer at that time, who owned $3,000 in property. His wife, his sons Henry, and this is William Scarlett, whose nickname as a child was Snowbee. It's interesting, if you look down here at the bottom, you see William Thompson, who was then 73. This is the same William Thompson that apprenticed Napoleon as a 6-year-old and kept him as a laborer until he was 21. William Thompson did own property at that time, but what's interesting to me is that his personal property was only valued at 1/3 of what his former apprentice owned. On January 1st, 1871, Napoleon bought 221 acres on Acock Swamp, just south of the Wilson County line, the first of at least a dozen or so land transactions totaling hundreds of acres over the next 25 years. He continued to do business with William J. Exum and Mary Exum frequently, including the purchase of a small piece of land in 1878. So this is the jacket for the deed of William J. Exum and wife to Napoleon Hagans, 3 acres, 1878. The Hagans family has preserved a cache of deeds that represent property that Napoleon bought, as well as property that his son William Scarlett Hagans bought. Napoleon often did not register his deeds, did not register his land purchases. And when he did, he sometimes registered them years after the actual purchase. So if you notice here, this particular deed was received and recorded only in 1885, which would have been 7 years after he actually bought this small parcel. In the years after the Civil War, the Republican Party in North Carolina, seen as the party of Lincoln and of emancipation, African Americans, men that is, as women were ineligible to vote, overwhelmingly voted Republican and often were elected to local office. Though he never held elected office, Napoleon was prominently active in Wayne County Republican politics and regularly served on juries and as an election judge. So here we have a page from an 1876 Superior Court minute book. And this is a list of, so it says the board appointed the following poll holders to serve as judges of election on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November, 1876, in the various townships in the county. And so we have here Nahunta Township and 4 judges of election, of which Napoleon here is the 4th. And as you see, there were other African Williams, Daniel Irwin, Harry Sauls, James Sykes. Again, this is a period, even though it's after Reconstruction, it's a period in which African Americans were still quite active in local politics. And this lasted really up until 1896, 1898, rather, when the events that culminated in the Wilmington Massacre effectively ended American voting rights and participation in electoral politics for the next, say, 50 or 60 years. By the mid-1870s, Napoleon had ascended into Wayne County's African American elite, recognized by both blacks and whites as a savvy and successful cotton farmer. He was a self-made man, though he could neither read nor write. His wife, Abby Ward Hagans, born into slavery, picked up the rudiments of an education at some point in her life and was able to scratch out a shaky signature as shown on the deed. So here is, this is a deed filed, well, for a property that was sold in 1888. And you see here that Napoleon signed with an X, but Abby signed her full name. Despite being unlettered, Napoleon Hagans was held up as an exemplar of his community. In an 1880 article in the Goldsboro Messenger about property taxes, Napoleon is one of 4 Nahunta Township farmers listed. 2, J.W. Aycock and Z.P. Davis, were white. The other 2, Napoleon Hagans and Washington Reed, were black. Napoleon was the wealthiest of all by an order of magnitude. You see here Napoleon's total property valued in 1874 was $4,155. This is compared to $2,240 for J.W. Aycock, $533 for Z.P. Davis, and $2,327 for Washington Reed. The same year, 1880, Napoleon Hagans was among several dozen men called to Washington, D.C. to testify before a Senate commission about the conditions that had led thousands of black farmers to migrate from the South to the Midwest, primarily Kansas and Indiana. This unexpected wave of migration, the first wide-scale voluntary movement of African Americans in the United States, generated considerable public attention and even alarm throughout the country. Many white Southerners charged that Northern agitators were luring away their black labor for political purposes, while Northerners countered that the white oppression of black Southerners was the cause of this mass migration. And so what happened, this was the migrants were called exodusters. And there were men, Pap Singleton being one of the most famous, who would travel around the countryside talking to farmers, to black farmers, and extolling the virtues of settling in the Midwest, you know, where land was available, and you know, the laws were less oppressive, and people just had a better opportunity. And this was, of course, during the booming sort of cotton years in the South. And white farmers were particularly alarmed that their laborers were leaving. And so this commission was formed. Literally dozens of men, black and white, were called to Washington to testify. Napoleon was questioned primarily by North Carolina's Senator Zebulon Vance. And in response to Vance's questions, Napoleon testified about his wealth and that of other African Americans in Wayne County. This is the first section of the official record, official transcript of his testimony. His name, it took me forever to find this because I wasn't looking for Higgins, I was looking for Hagans, but here he is. You notice that, I mean, these documents, these transcripts are really just a goldmine of information about the people who testify, both black and white. I mean, in particular here, Napoleon reveals, even in just this first section, he talks about where he lives. He says he doesn't stay in Goldsboro. He lives 15 miles from town. He owned 485 acres at that time. He worked for it. And to the question, were you formerly a slave? He responded, no, sir. I was a free man before the war. Napoleon also spoke of cotton he raised and gave specifics about the pay and rents he made with farmers, some of whom were white. He testified that he voted freely and that he served on juries. Napoleon's testimony would have been well received by Southern politicians as he generally painted a positive picture of conditions facing African Americans. And it can be tempting to view him as what we might call today a sellout. However, with careful reading, it is possible to detect an undercurrent of resistance in Napoleon's testimony and a justifiable pride in all he'd been able to accomplish in spite of conditions in the post-Reconstruction. The 1884 World's Fair was held in New Orleans, Louisiana, a port city which handled much of the cotton exported from the American South. The fair was dubbed the World Cotton Centennial because 1784 had marked the earliest surviving record of export of a shipment of cotton from the United States to England. It's not clear how he came to receive this designation, but Napoleon Hagans was named an honorary commissioner to this fair. And it's really difficult to see, but here's his name here. And he is Napoleon Hagans, Esquire, which I think in all of the years that I have researched African American history, politics in this era, I have never seen an African American man referred to as in an official document. Around this time, sometime in the 1880s, Napoleon built for his family a house that still stands on the edge of Acock Swamp. The house has been remodeled inside and out, but retains much of its form and is the only house built for an African-American family that is featured in Daniel Pizzoni's Glimpses of Wayne County, North Carolina, our architectural history. So this is the Napoleon Hagans house. I mentioned this earlier. I have been to this house several times. I have never been. I have gone. The owners are not at home, and I'm sorry to say that I have actually trespassed a bit to walk around and take pictures. So I hope that that they will forgive that. The description of the house in Pizzoni's architectural history, there's a description of its exterior. Apparently there was a section in the back here that was removed and basically moved across the road and turned into a tenant house at some point. But the description of the interior includes this passage. The most intact room in the house is the west parlor, as the rest of the interior has been continually remodeled since the 1930s. Through the west parlor's plain 4-panel door is an elegant small room with plastered walls, a simple Italianate style wooden mantelpiece, paneled wooden window aprons, and molded quasi-Greek key surrounds at the 3 windows and 1 door. This is said to be the room where Napoleon and his wife Apsala Hagans entertained family. So whoever it is that now lives in Appy Hagans' house is really occupying place. Napoleon Hagans poured his ambition and wealth into his and Appy's sons, Henry Ward, born in 1868, and William Scarlett, born in 1869. Little is known about their childhood, but they would have been of increasing comfort as their father's land holdings expanded. Henry and William attended local elementary schools, then left home to enter the preparatory university in Washington, D.C. Henry returned to North Carolina to attend college at Shaw City in Raleigh, graduating in 1890. He received a degree from Howard University's Law Department. After serving as secretaries to the Honorable George H. White, North Carolina's African-American representative to the United States Congress, 1897 to 1901, both brothers returned to North Carolina and settled into comfortable, distinguished livelihoods in farming, education, and real estate. So this is Henry Hagans, the young Henry Hagans. Actually, this is probably a photo when he was at Shaw. He graduated from Shaw in 1890. He took a job for a while as an attaché of who had been appointed. He was an African-American man born in Edgecombe County and appointed U.S. Recorder of Deeds. And then Hagans also was secretary to Congressman. He taught for a while in Danville, Virginia, which is where he met his wife, Julia Morton Hagans. They returned to Goldsboro, where he was principal of the state-colored normal school, which was the institute that prepared more or less the high school with a little bit. It prepared students to become teachers. For a while, he left the normal school and became a professor at what is now called North Carolina State Agriculture and Technical University, but at that point was called A&M University, and was what we might call a gentleman farmer. Napoleon and Appy's second son was William Scarlett Hagans. And you see him seated on the steps, we believe, of his home on Oak Street and near James, sort of behind where the synagogue is. William Hagans had a house there. He, of course, had farmland out in the county. His brother lived on Elm near, I believe, Slocum Street. But so William graduated from Howard Prep, which is essentially high school, in 1889, from Howard University in 1993, and then from Howard University's Law Department in 1998. He also taught at the State School in Goldsboro, was a secretary to Congressman White, and as well as his brother was a farmer. In about 1913, William and his wife, Lizzie Burnett Hagans, who was also a Goldsboro native, migrated to Philadelphia, where they raised their children, and William Hagans engaged in real estate sales and management there in Philly. Though Napoleon Hagans' youngest son was denied the advantages afforded Henry and William, he was the most prominent of all his children. Joseph Henry Ward was born August 4th, 1870 in Wilson. By 1890, he had struck out on his own, eventually to Indianapolis, Indiana. There, he went to work for a physician who would set him on the path to a medical degree. Joseph Ward founded a hospital, was personal physician to Madam C.J. Walker, and was the first Black physician appointed to head a Veterans Administration hospital, that being the hospital at Tuskegee, Alabama. So here is Dr. Joseph H. Ward. In the final years of his relatively short life, Napoleon Hagans continued to raise cotton and to buy and sell farmland in Wayne and Greene counties and city lots in Goldsboro. A letter submitted to a black newspaper in Raleigh during this period spoke of him with admiration. Among our many progressive farmers, I must mention Mr. Napoleon Hagans. In looking over his farm, I find that he is wide awake and keeps up with the times. He advises his tenants to persevere, to live economically and within their means, as that is the only sure road to prosperity and wealth. In 1889, Napoleon Hagans drafted 1/3 of his property to his wife Appy and 2/3 to be split between Smith and William. Appy Ward Hagans died in August 1895 at the age of 46. Almost a year to the day later, 1896, Napoleon Hagans died after a lingering illness. He was only 56 years old. He and his wife were buried in a family plot just west of their home. The plot now stands in a small clearing, a towering marble obelisk marking both Napoleon and Appy's graves. Though local newspapers noted his death only in passing, Napoleon Hagans' friends made certain that he was memorialized in fitting style. On September 1st, 1896, the Goldsboro Argus printed a flowery eulogy penned by E. Smith, college president, recent United States ambassador to Liberia, and arguably the most accomplished of Wayne County's 19th century African Americans. Some of you may recognize the name as that of a high school in Fayette. E. Smith was intimately involved in the establishment or the rise, if you will, of what is now known as Fayette State University. At 40 minutes after 10 o'clock on Monday evening, August 24th, 1896, Smith wrote, "The white-winged messenger that accompanied the spirits of mortals to the realms beyond, quietly of the subject of this sketch, and peacefully, gently conveyed across the mystic river of time all that was mortal of Napoleon Hagans." Smith painted a glowing portrait of his friend's virtues, his humble beginnings, his hard work and high character, his astuteness, his self-built wealth, his determination to give his children what he lacked. If any one of the many noble traits of the useful life stood out more prominently than another, shone more brilliantly than all the other characteristics which he possessed, possibly it was his fidelity. Nothing could swerve him from what he perceived to be right, from the performance of duty or the adherence to his obligation or promise was not to be broken. Napoleon's business acumen and successes won relationships across local color lines and among North Carolina's Black elite. And when Smith's eulogy called the roll of their attendance at Hagans' funeral, he noted Goldsboro's Reverend Clarence Dillard, a name some of you may recognize as the man after whom Goldsboro's longtime African-American high school was named. North Carolina rural roads did not have formal names in the 1990s when the state required them for a 911 emergency network. 100 years after his death, the name chosen for the road leading to Napoleon Hagans is a permanent memorial to this extraordinary man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for this wonderful presentation. I'm going to unmute individuals and we can also take questions in chat, but we'd like to open the floor up to questions for anybody who'd like to ask questions of Lisa, chat, everything. I'll also be putting a feedback form link in the chat for everyone as well.
I'll start. I'll say that I see that there are actually two reads with us tonight, and the reads were a large free family of color that lived in the Eureka area, just north of Eureka. They're another, I mean, that's another amazing story all of their own. They are descended from two sisters who were married to, sisters were born free, married to enslaved men, had large families, and those families sort of went out and things. And in Wilson, where I grew up, the first African-American veterinarian was Elijah L. Reed. He's a member of the family. There was a principal of Wilson's colored graded school, J.D. Reed, a member of this family. Lots of carpenters, builders were. It's great to see Emma Reed Bailiff and DeMarcus Reed with us tonight.
Thank you, Lisa, for that. Because I did a little research on the Reeds, and I went back to Rhoda Reed, but didn't know that much about her until I saw the advertisement for this, and I went down a rabbit hole of just finding out information. So thanks for putting that out there.
Reed was Rhoda was incredible. Her sister was Tabitha. It's very difficult to research free families of color from Wayne County. We've got, for Napoleon, for example, we have his family in the 1850 census. But prior to that, it's really pretty murky. It appears that his grandmother is listed in the 1840 census in Nash County. At that time, Wayne County and Nash County actually adjoined. There was no Wilson County. So it's not a big stretch to move from Nash to Wayne. But we really don't know much about her. And the same thing with Rhoda Reed and her sister. We know a little bit, but they were both landowners. They left property for their children. Their children were all prosperous. These women were born in the 1790s, and their children were born in the 18 teens and 20s and 30s, and were contemporaries. Actually, a little bit older than he was.
We've also got a question in the chat. Lisa, I think we're having a slight bandwidth issue, but we should still be able to hear you. There we go. We have a question in the chat. So can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Hello.
In the chat, we have a question from Eve Kahn. She says, this is absolutely riveting. What are the mysteries about Napoleon Hagans and his family? What mysteries are you still working on? What's been elusive?
It's kind of, yeah. Can you all hear me? I think Kelsey, okay, Kelsey's back. Yeah. So Eve, I think it's just kind of what I was alluding to with DeMarcus. I think the biggest mystery, well, there are two big mysteries. One of them is his origins, really. Where did the Haganses come from? The Haganses were, like the Reeds, kind of a large extended family. If you look in the 1850 census of Wayne County, there are several dozen Haganses, but it's not entirely clear what their relationship is to one another. So there's that, there's his origins. And then there's also his start. I mean, he gives this sort of laconic to the question of how he got started. He says, "Well, you know, I rented this property from William Exum," but that doesn't quite seem to how he went from absolutely nothing to bailing his father-in-law out of a $450 debt in the same year the Civil War, in 1865. So he, by all accounts, there are some pieces that have kind of come down in family lore about him. He was, I guess maybe the best way to put it, he was a hard man. You know, I mean, in terms of, he was all about his business and did not brook a lot of, you know, foolishness from folks that worked for him. And apparently that served him in good stead. But still, it's just, you know, to make he was not, say, for example, unlike the Reeds, you know, he did not inherit money from his parents. He did not inherit property from his parents. So that, I think that's one of the big mysteries that I'd like to know more about.
Hi, I'm on the line. I'm just making sure I'm okay to speak because I hit star six. I had to dial in. Is it okay for me to speak? I don't want to speak
Of
over
course.
anyone.
Yeah, of
Okay.
course, please.
Yeah, so this is Solel Harris. I was on at first, like, as, you know, on video, but then my data was acting really weird. So I just want to say thank you to Ms. Henderson for presenting this information. I'm totally intrigued because my great grandmother, just listening in and just listening to what I think Kelsey just said, is exactly what me and my mom were speaking about. My great grandmother, my father's adopted, but his mother and father's lineage is all he knows. So my great grandmother was a Haggins, spelled Heggins. And I remember as a kid going to the family reunions, and they had censuses from way back. And just as she was saying, they were from Nash County. And it was a very large family, but, you know, back then, a lot of the name spellings and different stuff and families were split, and they went here, they went there, and they were just, you know, doing their own thing, just exploring, I guess, some of being free and some of, you know, just, it's, you know, just a big mix-up, just like all families. Sometimes you just kind of go your own way, but then they were, like I said, spellings of Hagans, like Hagans, like Mr. Napoleon, and then Hagans, like I said, Hagins, and like you all just said, that's Nash County. You know, sure, Wilson County is like right there, Wayne County, and so it's just really interesting to hear just a little bit more. I knew nothing about Napoleon Hagans. I actually went to natural hair school down in Goldsboro last year, and that was my first time. I'm from Zebulon, but that was my first time really like traveling those roads. I learned about Dudley, Eureka, all of those small towns that I knew. I heard of Fremont, and my mom is from Bailey, North Carolina. So I knew a little bit about some of those areas, but just learning a little bit more. I'm a big history girl. So it's been very amazing just to hear more. And I'm going to go down, like I heard one of the other participants saying, go down that rabbit hole and just take a moment to just do a little bit more research. But this was amazing. Just the information that I heard was just like so wowing, like him exploring and taking off, just going to like Indianapolis and this World Fair. That was so interesting. So thank you for just providing us with this information. And I definitely plan to do more research. And I'd like to get a recording if possible. So I'll be reaching out to the library for that. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. It is, well, first let me say thank you to Shauna, just to her comment in the chat. And I thought you would enjoy, Shauna, the fact that these were both, that William and Henry were Howard University Bison. Thought you would like that. But yeah, I mean, these stories are, they've been forgotten. We kind of look around and we think of kind of African American history in two points. There's sort of slavery, and then there's the civil rights movement, and we don't really think about sort of all of the textures of history, all of the sort of layers, all of the really varied lives that people led, that all sort of made up these communities and the histories of these communities, particularly in a place like Wayne County, which had a really large, relatively speaking, free population prior to the Civil War. Those families who are still in Wayne County, I mean, if you know Artises, if you know Haganses, if you know Wins, Simmonses, Manuels, Jacobses, Reeds, all of those were free families of color, and who had obviously lots in common with enslaved people, but who also just had a really different life. And what some of them were able to pass on to their children meant that, communities, the sort of social strata in these communities was very complex. And so you had people like Napoleon, and you had people like the Reeds, sort of side by side with descendants of slaves, with descendants of the men and women who enslaved people, or men and women who apprenticed children like Napoleon, and he was a child. Just really a complex and fascinating period of time, I think. And I always am interested in just getting more stories told, and having of the complexity of Southern history, the complexity of African American history, the complexity of local history. I mean, people seem to think that history happens, up here, and really, there's so much that's right around us that's worthy of, that can tell us things about why our communities are the way they are now. Maybe can give us some pointers about how what we might want to change our communities. I'm such a big believer in Sankofa, this idea that in order to move forward, you have to know your past. I see a quick question. Why do you think Wayne County has such a large number of free people? I wrote a whole master's thesis on free people of color, and there's not an easy answer. There's not a sure answer, but is that Wayne County had a relatively large Quaker population. And though the Quakers, some did own slaves, though they were not supposed to, they had enough sort of social and political influence that Wayne County arguably was a more welcoming place than some of the surrounding counties. I mean, for example, Sampson and Duplin counties, you had petitions being filed in the state legislature to remove all the free people and send them to Africa. You know, you had, you know, there was kidnapping of free children of color and selling them into slavery. So, you know, people just kind of drifted in. I mean, I look at my family, the Hendersons. We originated in Onslow County, down by Jacksonville. We just kind of slowly drifted up to the area around Dudley. The same thing with the Aldridges. They were originally from Sampson and Duplin, kind of drifted up. There were other families like them, and you know, just kind of formed a community. The communities around Eureka were comprised of families that had kind of drifted down from Edgecombe County, drifted over from Nash, and just sort of formed these communities in which they found similar people. You know, free people of color could not marry white people. They could marry enslaved people, but there was a price to pay. You know, if you were a free man of color and you married an enslaved, your children would be enslaved. If you were a free woman of color and you married an enslaved man, your children's father could be sold away at any time. So free people of color sought each other's company and created these communities. So that's my theory, anyway.
Are you in touch with Madam C.J. Walker's descendants? Have they been helpful to you?
You know, actually, so Joseph Ward's descendants, who are my cousins, I am in touch with, and I know that they have had conversations with Alilia Bundles, Madam C.J. Walker's great granddaughter. And I know particularly kind of popped up, I think 2 years ago when there was the Netflix, yeah, which I think everybody, well, I won't say everybody, the Walker family wasn't really crazy about it, and the Ward family, to the extent that Joseph Ward was completely written out of the story, wasn't crazy about it either. So. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Larry. Yeah. Yeah, I would love to come back and talk about the Reeds at some time. I'd love to do that. And also, I mean, if you, I have a couple of blogs. Let me put them in the chat really quickly. And one of them is dedicated to free people of color. And there's lots about Wayne County free people of color there. So that's this first one. And then the second one is my genealogy blog, in which I talk a lot about, I give more about the Haganses, more about sort of my lines. And that's that. And then the third is a blog, the one that's most active, that's dedicated to African-American family and history of Wilson County, which is one county over. But inevitably there's Greene County, I mean, there's Wayne County stuff on that blog. And there's quite a bit about the Reeds because so many of them came to Wilson to sort of make their names. So that's my 3 blogs. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and listening. This has been I'm just really passionate about these stories. I hope you can tell, and so happy to share. this information, and so excited to know that there are people who are interested as well, and want to know more. So this is great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us tonight. It's been really wonderful to work with you, and I have so enjoyed everything I've learned and look forward to learning more.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night. Do we have any further questions before we log off, or?
Yeah.
I think everybody's. Thank y'all. Have a wonderful night and take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Be safe.